I'd like to thank everyone for coming on this beautiful sunny day. Welcome to our Diverse Talk. Today's event is mainly talking about supporting newcomers in navigating the Canadian labor market. Our focus today is micro-credentialing. So we've launched these series of talks, diverse talks, to engage people in the community in meaningful connective dialogue relating to major issues that we have seen through diversity and through our history of serving immigrants. So just before we start, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So I am coming from you from the ancestral and traditional and unceded territories of the Simiamu, Katski, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kekwat, Musqueam, and Tsawwassen First Nations. The knowledge and traditions and ongoing contributions of these communities are significant, and we are so thankful to have the privilege of doing the work that we love in these communities. And we also like to recognize the importance that reconciliation has in truly building inclusive and strong communities. So today I would like to introduce our all-star panel. And we're really excited about this opportunity and the discussion that is before us. So first, we'd like to introduce Nick Narani, a social entrepreneur, motivational speaker, best-selling author, consultant, immigration champion, and founder of Immigrant Networks. Nick has done some incredible work, please Google him and look him up. He is also the founder of the Canadian Immigrant magazine and Prepare for Canada. Nick has always been a powerful voice in the integration of immigrants in Canada and in the workplace. Also, we have with us Michael Yu, a friend of DIVERSEcity. He's the interim director of partnerships and development office at the Vancouver Community College. Michael has been in post-secondary education work, particularly with employment, career development for over 20 years. During his time at BCC, Michael has overseen major initiatives in employment services, programs for immigrants, skills training programs, and entrepreneur programs. And we have Juan Azmitia. I've kind of butchered his name, but sorry, Juan. He is a faculty member and academic coordinator at BCIT. Juan teaches business information technology, computer applications, and project management at BCIT. Juan has done some interesting work throughout the last 20 years, teaching computer applications and project management and intercultural management courses in very exciting places, not only Canada, but Mexico, France, Guatemala, Chile, Ecuador, and Japan. A lot of those countries are on my bucket list to visit. So I'd love to hear more after this session and connect with you. And we have our very own Vandna Joshi. She is the senior manager. She's a senior manager here at DIVERSEcity. She has served immigrants for many, many years, particularly in employment and settlement programs. Vandna has recently received the Surrey Women's in Business Award for Nonprofit Leader category. So what an outstanding achievement and an outstanding panel. Vandna also brings a vast amount of experience with federal and provincial micro-credentialing programs. So before we start, I'm going to ask the panel to tell us a little bit more about their work and what is their connection to today's topic, micro-credentialing. So Nick, can you start first?
You know, I get flummoxed when I get asked to speak about myself, and so I just say I help immigrants fulfill their dreams. Started with a magazine, and then went on to pre-arrival programs, and now with Immigrant Networks. For me, it's always addressing the pain points that newcomers have and trying to build solutions for those pain points. Some of those are funded through various sources, but essentially it's to create that social impact as far as newcomers are concerned. And thank you to Garrison, Vandna, Tina, all of you for having me on the panel. It's a privilege to be with all the other luminaries out here.
All right, and Michael, can you go next? what is your connection to today's topic and the work you do?
Well, there's first and foremost a personal connection, because I came to Canada first as an international student and then as an immigrant, and then calling Canada my home for the last 30 plus years. And my work at the college and also before that has always got me into programming and support for immigrants, skilled immigrants particularly, who really need a bit of a push, right? Whether it's about reskilling or upskilling, so that they can do better in the Canadian labor market. So yeah, I'm really delighted today to be part of the panel and talk a bit more about immigrants, labor market, but also specifically about micro-credentials, which is of course a hot topic these days. And some of my colleagues are here too to support because they also involved in micro-credential development at BCC.
Excellent. And Juan?
Oh, thank you. I was in mute. So yeah, my name is Juan Azmitia, and I have been working at BCIT for 24 years.
Wow.
My connection with the topic of today is same. I came here as an immigrant, and I went to school to BCIT, and after I graduated, I never left the place. So I started to work there in financial aid and program advising. And basically for 10 years, I worked as an academic advisor, and my specialty was with newcomers, professional immigrants who moved to Canada and they needed to get incorporated into the labor market. And so my job was to advise which courses to take. So I spent like 10 years doing that. In addition, a couple of years ago, the Ministry of Education approached BCIT asking to develop some micro-credentials. And I was lucky enough to be part of the process, and I developed 2 courses that belong to micro-credentials. So I've been actively involved with the School of Business in the development of micro-credentials. So I worked 10 years as an academic advisor, and I've been around 10 years working as faculty member in the School of Business. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Juan. And Vandna, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. What a great panel here we have today, and thank you all for joining as well. So again, as other panelists said, my connection started with this whole journey. It is a personal connection, and when it's personal, it hits home, it's more powerful, I guess. So then it translated into a professional journey. So I've been with DIVERSEcity for the last 15 years. I myself am an immigrant and came to Canada about 18 years ago. Out of those 15 years have been spent at DIVERSEcity. But micro-credentialing is very recent, but the main pain points for immigrants that I realized being an immigrant myself is credential evaluation, credential recognition, not having Canadian experience. And when I was going through the journey myself, and I wanted to join a sector where my work could impact somebody's life, even in the slightest way, that was the main purpose and meaning for myself. And along the journey, you know, I learned a lot. There have been numerous experiences. Then I got into a position where I was privileged and had the opportunity to develop and design some of the programmings along with my team. We have an amazing team at DIVERSEcity. And, you know, and the recent micro-credentialing program that came through, DIVERSEcity has been advocating for micro-credentialing, and we are really fortunate to have these programs delivered through DIVERSEcity in partnership with secondary colleges and institutions. So that's my journey and my purpose and association with micro-credentialing.
Excellent. And I just wanted to remind everyone that's tuned in here that your questions are very, very important. And so Tina will be monitoring the chat. We have a few questions for the panel, but we will pick up some of the questions in the chat and to make sure that everybody is fully participating. And we will also post everyone's contacts, or I'll ask the panelists to post their contacts in the chat, just in case somebody wants to follow up later. So thank you so much. And we will launch into our questions. And I dare to say the word post-pandemic. Should I say that? But everything with all the other stuff that's coming out. But as we are transitioning from this current pandemic, let's just say that, and you look at the labor market and the skills shortage, what are you anticipating what that looks like? So we're crying about skill shortages, especially in healthcare. What is your assessment potentially coming out of this pandemic? And I'll open that up to the panel.
Okay, so let me start off. Here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a couple of things that are really interesting. I see a lot of media continuing to talk about the fact that immigrants are facing challenges and talking about that six-horned devil, no Canadian experience. And I see that in the media. But when I see my audiences, starting to get jobs within 3 months, 4 months, 6 months maximum. These are brand new in the country. So I'm seeing both of these things happening. I think very quickly, what Immigrant Networks does is we are actually going back to the genesis of what settlement agencies used to be. So we're actually going back and creating those communities where we've got people advising newcomers. So we've got two programs. One is the peer-to-peer networking, which connects someone based on their profession for, at no cost, a video call every week where you get a chance to talk to someone who's a professional from your same category. That's one of the programs that we do. The other program is actually run by our ambassadors. So people who went through these programs, got jobs, came back and said, how do we contribute? How do we pay it forward? So Immigrant Networks is an opportunity for them to become ambassadors. And these ambassadors conduct, well, all is supposed to be a 1 hour Wednesday call, but sometimes it ends up being a 2 hour call because newcomers want to talk to people who've succeeded. So that's what we do. But I am seeing a lot of them getting jobs very fast. One of our members actually got a job offer from Bell, TELUS, and Manulife, and had to make a choice between the three of them. And that's a great choice to have for a newcomer who's been in Canada for 90 days. So I'm seeing both sides of it. So I don't know. I'd be happy to hear from the rest of the panelists as to what they're hearing.
So Garrison, I can go next. When before the pandemic, if we look at national data like from Stat Canada, we're still looking at disparity between immigrants' employment and their earnings and the Canadian born, right? I mean, over the last couple of decades, of course, there's been ups and downs, right? Sometimes the gap was narrower, sometimes the gap was actually widened. And usually you could attribute that to the changes in the labor market. So I agree with Nick. I think now we're sitting at a time where the pendulum has swung, probably to the benefits of a lot of newcomers. But this is not going to stay like that forever. And so when the economy goes down, and maybe we're again looking at more significant impact on what we call the new or recent immigrant population, right? And also it is very challenging to make general statements too, because even if you look at how Statistics Canada conduct their longitudinal analysis, at the very least, if not talking about different sectors and occupational groups, we're talking about brand new immigrants, right? Like 1 to 5 years, and then recent immigrants 6 to 10, and then long-term immigrants above 10 years. And their performance in the labor market always shifts. I think in relation to getting Canadian education, whether it's micro-credentials that we'll talk more about today, or in general, I think for newer immigrants, that is probably something that they should really seriously consider, right? Because by obtaining some local credentials, they may be able to add to their resume something that is valuable to kind of get that push from the beginning. Having said that, sitting here at the college, we often hear from our advisors that sometimes they have prospective students coming in, new immigrants who have been here for a while. They have many things that they needed to deal with, right? Settling down, finding a job that is not necessarily related to their career. And it's only later that they realize that they're stuck in the labor market progress that they consider Canadian post-secondary education. Sometimes even those immigrants say, well, I wish that I had considered coming back to school a little bit earlier. But I guess everyone's pathway is a little bit different. So it'll be interesting to see how this current labor market opens up opportunities so that immigrants can get a stronger start.
And any of the panelists can jump in, but I just, Michael, you kind of made me think of another question, and it's around, isn't it in the best interest of our country to kind of create pathways, easy pathways for people coming in to get their, micro credentials or credential evaluation and all that process? Like, isn't it in our best interest with our population aging out pretty rapidly and all the shortages? So anyone on the panel, and Michael, you can answer that follow-up as well.
I don't think sorry, Vandna, go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. I would like to address that, and both Michael and Garrison, you rightfully said that this is about creating pathways. Definitely, we want to touch base on some quick facts that I've found on the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training website, because regarding micro-credentials, this has been a very, as I said, it's quite recent investment, and the investment has been up to $5 million, which is a collaboration from the Workforce Development Agreement and the provincial government as well. But why this investment has been made is because some of the projections are that over the next decade, approximately 80% of the job openings in BC will require some sort of post-secondary education. Definitely the effects of COVID-19 and the rapid change in workforce, would benefit by transitioning towards more in high demand and high opportunity jobs to succeed in the British Columbia's economy. People who complete a micro-credential receive in-demand skills for employment, which also, as you said, Garrison, leads to different learning pathways to further improve qualifications and expand their career opportunities. To me personally, micro-credentials act as a nitro boost for somebody who's looking to get a foot in the door without going through a gruesome and a cumbersome process of re-credentialing all over again, be it a new immigrant, be it somebody who's been affected through the effects of COVID-19, lost their job and has to think hard which path to choose. This is going to act as a nitro boost for them.
Great, and I see Juan has his hand up.
Yes, so I just would like to add about what's the current situation post-pandemic for new immigrants when it comes to employment. I think right now there is a lot of employment, but there are not good jobs. Okay, so you will see there are a lot of jobs right now, but the number of jobs for professionals is not as big as the other ones that don't require skills. So still immigrants, we are still facing the challenges of if you don't have Canadian work experience, you don't qualify. And how will I get the Canadian work experience if you don't give me the opportunity? It's a catch-22 that we had forever. So going back to this, there are jobs that require skills, and where I see the potential of micro-credentials is that micro-credentials will provide those specific skills for new immigrants, and the micro-credential will be issued by a local university, college, or local school. And that's when the industry will start to look at your resume. Unfortunately, this is the way the market works here. But because I see people tell me, oh, there are a lot of jobs. How come people don't want to work? Yeah, there are a lot of jobs, but not professional jobs. The jobs with technical skills are still limited right now. It's going to change, and this is where micro-credentials will kick in. Okay. Thank you.
Nick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, you know, and I want to take a step back and say, you know, what I'd like to move away from is treating immigrants as one monolith. They're not. They're all very different, and we need to recognize that the needs of immigrants will be very different. So while I have one person who got a great job at Dell, I've got another person who got a great job with an amazing software company, one of the largest in the world. And how did it happen? So it's important that we recognize that, number one. Number two is micro-credentials are great. So here's what it tells the employer. Tell the employer, this person recognizes there is something that they need to do to layer their previous education experience and so they can get into the workforce. So it shows that there's a desire to learn, which is great for an employer. The most important thing, and my concern, I want to be very clear about this, is that I'm very thrilled that organizations like BCIT and VCC are taking this forward, because I have seen so many newcomers who get scammed into taking courses and spending a lot of money. So it is something that is required. And as we were talking before the presentation started, and the discussion started, I'd be looking at a lot more a combination of when there's a micro-credential course, how can you supplement the technical skills with soft skills? So that's my take on it. Thank you.
I'm going to pose this question to Vandna now, because she's got a sort of, and the panel can jump in, have a unique experience here. First of all, you know, maybe explain a bit what micro-credentialing is, but also, do employers understand micro-credentialing? So we'll let Vandna go, and then we'll open the floor up.
Thanks, Garrison. So the technical definition of micro-credentials is it's a non-degree certificate that verifies your skill and competencies in a particular skill area. So micro-credentials have been widely recognized, and actually there has been some consultation happening in the background. It seems like it's quite obvious, and you know, Michael and Juan can testify to it, because these programs, as I said, are very recent and has been developed in consultation with some of the employers, some of the post-secondary educations, and a lot of the employers have recognized the importance of micro-credentials. Again, as Nick rightfully said, that it's also adding a layer. If the employers feel that there's a little piece that's missing that could really bridge the gap between somebody having, in case of immigrants, having a prior learning experience, or in case of any regular Canadian who's been working and just needs a little bit of upskilling and uplift to go into a desired profession. So that's where micro-credentials come in. Employers definitely recognize, because sometimes, you know, there are positions, there are jobs that are not, for example, a full-fledged accounting degree takes years, but somebody to do the work of payroll and accounting and bookkeeping, you just need a little certificate that you can go into. That also supplements your income, sets you on a path. If you want to pursue the degree along the way, you take up these micro-credentials, and, you know, it also transfers to a degree. Trades is another example. Trades have been very popular, and DIVERSEcity has done a very, very successful program in collaboration with ACE Community College for electrical harmonized training, which is a step into apprenticeship step into a trades profession, and it could be layered with level 1, level 2 certification and going into a full-fledged technical education. And micro credentials are not only for people who have been unemployed, it's been open to people who are employed full-time as well. So they can also take advantage. They can be working, and the government has provided funding for people who are working up to 30 hours a week and still able to access micro-credentialing program. And that has never been the case as far as I've known employment programs. So definitely employers have an opportunity to sponsor people who are working and need that little support for these programs as well as people who are unemployed looking for positions to access these programs.
Perfect. And, you know, I often wonder, you know, there's a lot of talk about this stuff. And for Michael and Juan, you know, from a post-secondary point of view, and to kind of look at what's happening in that environment, do you feel these micro-credentials are holding weight with employers? And what industries are you seeing them being mostly taken advantage of, or seeing the most flow upward trend with these?
I will go first, if that's okay, Michael.
Sure.
So, you know, micro credentials, the advantage of micro credentials is that they offer you very specific skills that you are missing, even if you are currently employed or if you are a newcomer. Where I see that there is a big trend is in the area of IT. Okay, this is my specialty in the School of Business, and I just will use some examples right now. For example, data analytics, you know, the capability of analyzing big data, because right now we are creating more and more data as a society. So CPA, Certified Professional Accountants, now part of their curriculum is data analytics. So you have people who have been working accounting for the last 20, 25 years, and they have no knowledge in data analytics. So they come to BCIT and then take 1 or 2 courses, a micro credential in data analytics. So that's where they get the boost to, you know, to get up to speed of the new employment trends. So in IT, you will see, for example, a lot into cybersecurity, which is a new topic. Cybersecurity 20 years ago did not exist, or if it was very limited. Now you see every small business or medium-sized business has a presence on the web. Furthermore, they are vulnerable to cybercrime. And that's where the micro-credential comes in cybersecurity. The specific courses to make, to educate people in a specific skill that translates into jobs or into a career advancement. Another example, project management. You have people who are engineers, and because they are good engineers, all of a sudden they get promoted to be managers, but they don't know, they don't have the management skills. They are great engineers, but they lack that. So then we offer a micro-credential, for example, in project management. So at BCIT, we had something very similar to micro-credentials in the past for many years, which were associate certificates. And those associate certificates were 7 specific courses in different areas. Now, micro-credentials took over associate certificates because now people need credentials in a shorter period of time, and industry is desperate for people with technical skills. So that's where I see micro-credentials, how they are working in the industry right now. Okay.
Yeah, I'll chip in a bit. You know, I guess, Juan, you work out of the part-time studies area in BCIT, which is kind of continuing studies. I guess if we go across the board and talk to our colleagues in continuing studies in different colleges and universities, some of them probably will say that, well, you know, we've been doing micro-credentials for the last few decades. Because in some ways, right, micro-credentials, this thing called short training, competency-related, employer recognized and all that, that has in fact, at least in principle, been a model followed by many continuing studies units throughout many, many years. And that is why also today, if you look at a lot of the newer micro-credentials offerings, they do come out of continuing studies or part-time studies at, like at the BCIT. That said, I think there is still a lot of values to kind of provide this new term, if we can call it, and allow a lot of these short duration courses or programs to be more visible, particularly in this case for new immigrants. I mean, I can see in the chat that, you know, all the time we have concerns, right? Nick said the same. Do new immigrants really need the training? Are there skill gaps, authentic gaps, or are they perceived gaps, right? Like who is in the best position to assess the skills? I mean, in post-secondary and also in career development, we have this thing called prior learning assessment, PLA. Some colleges do that more, others not as much. Community-based organizations such as DIVERSEcity, you probably don't actually have a PLA unit, right, to do that, because in a lot of the cases, doing prior learning assessment is connected to people's access and admission to post-secondary education. But I really think that if together we want to support skilled immigrants to have better pathways into the labor market, you know, whether it is direct entry, getting employed, or through education or a combination of that, I think we really need to improve how we assess and evaluate the experience and the skill sets of the immigrants. Now, for the longest time, Canada has a system in many provinces of assessing the formal educational qualifications of immigrants. Well, BCIT has a service. Toronto, you know, Ontario has that. So we have those things, but they look at the formal education, not the informal and non-formal, right? I mean, employment counselors at DIVERSEcity, for example, I think they are skilled and trained in looking at the skill sets of new immigrants. But we don't really have a consistent model of doing that. So when immigrants walk into a post-secondary institution, depending on, you know, which part of the college they go into, what advisors they're talking to, they may be getting a little bit different assessment. So I think it is very important to look at that level. And then when it comes to micro-credentials, I mean, if you look across the board in Canada, this is still a very new phenomenon in post-secondary. So I would say that at this moment, it is valuable for new immigrants to maybe consider some of the micro-credentials. They should not forget that. There are many more courses and programs in continuing studies and part-time studies. And for those who do need a more significant retraining, then of course they go towards longer certificates and even diplomas. So maybe it's more about looking at the options and then figuring it out, right? What option is the best? And we can only make informed choices. Nothing is a guarantee for success, right? So that's my take. Nick, your hand is up for a long time.
That's okay. That's okay. There are a couple of things. You know, I want to respond to Juan's statement. Yes, absolutely. You know, I see. According to statistics, 80% of engineers who come to Canada will never practice as engineers. Yeah. So yes, project management is used, and thank you. I applaud that. I think that's great, and I'd be happy to send my audience to that. And so the other area, Juan, that I would add is healthcare. So, you know, a lot of people who are coming in as medical doctors, some of them come from countries where it's unsafe for them to stay on. So it's almost like the choice is between, do I live or do I practice as a medicine? I realize I won't become a doctor in Canada, but there are alternative careers. So over the past few years, I've noticed that specifically in construction, where they need to have in the physical construction site, they need to have people who have medical knowledge to take care of accidents, so on and so forth. So that becomes an alternative career. And so I think it's important to start exploring those reasons. The other thing that's bothering me, and I want to talk about this very candidly, is the word credential. So for any immigrant, when you say credential, you break out in a rash. Because for us, that is the devil. I would much rather look at something like micro learning or something that would talk about skills and learning which supplement what they do. The usage of the word, the phrase credentials kind of confuses people because and I'm talking to the Canadian context. I'm not talking about what it is globally. So that's the second point I had. The third point I had is how much of this is going to be online content. It's very important that we recognize that content doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, in the strangest way, we got that lesson from the pandemic that it does not need to be, you know, bums on seats. And so from that perspective, having it online could also benefit the pre-arrival audience. People who are now growing, the pre-arrival segment is grown. You've got huge people who are wanting to have this kind of access so they can start getting this knowledge and they can hit the ground running. Sorry, did I take too much time?
No, Nick, I'm gonna, oh yeah, go, you can respond to that, Michael, and then I'll come back to Nick for
Right, no, Greg has a great point, right? You know, about credentialing. You know, Juan and I are in the post-secondary system. What is that system based on? It's based on credentials, right? Like I mean, I have colleagues here from VCC, but I'm going to say this anyway, right? Like we are, for the longest time, post-secondary monopolizes credentialing, right? Now, at the same time, as Vandna says, you know, an organization such as DIVERSEcity, you can either seek funding from province or federal on your own, and then you can develop skill training programs, or you can work with, you know, a post-secondary partner. But either way, right, today, I don't think post-secondary institutions actually have the monopoly of skill training or even education, depending on what you consider to be education. However, credentialing is still pretty much a monopoly, particularly in Canada, because we are a significantly publicly funded post-secondary education system. Now, there are many private post-secondary institutions, like many private colleges, in every major, you know, cities of Canada, and they also have their own credentials, right? And so this proliferation of credentials, and now we even have micro credentials, and so yes, I think it can become very confusing for many immigrants because where they come from, they probably don't yet have this thing called the micro credentials. So I like Nick's point about micro learning. Now, that said, I think we're still in a society and the labor market where employers are asking or looking for credentials. Now, there's a lot of evidence showing that major employers particularly are moving more towards competency-based hiring. But I don't think that they're going to stop asking for credentials, at least as the foundation. And as I said earlier, you know, I think this is a time where maybe we shouldn't just look at post-secondary as the only venue for the development and delivery of micro credentials. I think there is a lot of opportunity for partnership. And I know that, Garrison, you want to talk about that at the later part of today's panel. I think the landscape is a bit more open now. And even government funding right now, it's being given to a very broad range of organizations. Industry associations run their own programming, and big companies, Google, Microsoft, like they have micro credentials way before even major universities get into micro credentials, right? I mean, they all started with badging and all those things. So it's a peculiar landscape, I think, and I think newcomers now more than ever need good guidance from career counselors, and whether they're in community organizations or in post-secondary institutions, they become very, very important so that immigrants can make informed choices to further their career pathways.
Yeah, and I was just curious to ask Nick this question, and it's come up in the chat, but I'm going to add another element to it. We have the employers, we have the employment services, and we have the educational institutions. what can we do better to work together to kind of develop even micro-credentialing that is sort of looking forward to seeing what's coming, what's going to be needed, but also helping people that are here that have the majority of skills that they could recognize, hey, there's so much skill set in this area, let's develop a micro-credential or micro-learning for that. So how can we bridge that gap? Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Okay, how can we control, and control is probably not the right word. How can we put in checks and balances to ensure that these credentials are not created into a money grab? So what are the things that we do? So if something is recognized by the BC Education Ministry, for example, that's the one I'd like to direct newcomers to. I wouldn't like it to go to a private individual or private college, because those are areas that, you know, you do not know the quality of the education. You don't recognize you don't even know how they would be looked at by employers. Employers may not recognize it because they don't see it of value. But the newcomer may not understand that distinction, and therefore they could fall prey to those kind of classes as well.
Yeah, and Juan, go ahead. You've got your hand up.
So I just would like to go back to something that Nick talked a few minutes ago about the healthcare system. Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, micro-credentials are not designed for every single field. The healthcare field in Canada is highly regulated. Yeah, so that's the problem with micro-credentials in the healthcare, and probably you will not see a lot of them in the healthcare field. And I just wanted to clarify that, because it's important to know that some industries are more regulated than other ones, and healthcare is, unfortunately, it is highly regulated. And I wanted to make sure the audience understands that. Yeah?
Absolutely. So Juan, my point was for alternative careers, not existing careers as alternative careers. For a doctor who realizes that the pathway to residency is a very long one, for them it makes complete sense, but it is not for them to practice their profession. You're right, absolutely right. Thank you.
And the other thing is, going back to Nick and Michael's point about certifications, or, you know, making sure new immigrants or immigrants go to the right places that have the standard and have credibility in the industry. That's very important. I think micro-credentials are very valuable when they are developed and they are delivered by institutions who have put the infrastructure and have spent the time to develop them and develop the partnerships with industry. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that has happened in the past. There are some colleges that are not recognized, and then you have a new immigrant getting in high student loans, with the hope that they will get a job. And then that particular college, it is not recognized. So, you know, my advice, even if you take a certificate, an associate certificate, or if you take a micro-credential, make sure you do your research, that the institution that is offering it, it has credibility within the industry.
Yeah, I think Wright is definitely correct. And if you look at a lot of the newer micro-credentials, they are at this time designed for people who are in mid-careers, right? So we're not talking about, you know, taking a 70-hour course or micro-credential and be able to enter the labor market. Well, without that, you cannot. So we're at this point, we're not talking about that. However, there are different types of micro-credentials, right? I mean, there are some that are as short as 30 hours, which is literally one course. And then there are micro-credentials that are based on a combination of courses, and it'll be longer. Now, of course, the development also now goes the direction that maybe we're not really focusing so much on the hour of training, but on the competencies that the training is able to provide to the learner. That said, we do know that the time of learning has some correlation to your learning outcome and how much you would acquire the competency. So I guess it depends on, you know, the sector, as Juan was talking about, the occupation, and regulated professions. Certainly, it may take more time, I think, for more micro-credentials perhaps to be rolled out that are in those, within the scope of those regulated professions. But I think for new immigrants, right, a lot of the challenges, particularly in the regulated professions, are still connected to the recognition or the lack of recognition of their qualifications that they bring to Canada from overseas. That piece on its own, I don't think can be resolved by micro-credentials. You know, for years, millions and millions of dollars have been pumped into the system across the country to support licensing bodies, right, to improve their credential recognition pathways for new immigrants, and that is still going on. There have been some, I guess, really notable developments, even in medicine, in nursing. But I think for a lot of us, we would like to see more happening. So yeah, so I think micro-credentials can be very useful for immigrants in their mid-career stage to maybe obtain Canadian experience through learning and to, I guess, acquire some of the new skills that are more relevant maybe in the Canadian environment, but not necessarily to resolve the more root issue of qualification recognition.
Vandna, there's always been a, oh, sorry, I'm just gonna interject with this one question because it's a curious one, and then Nick, you can come jump in. It might be relevant to what you're gonna say. But Vandna, I've always questioned the responsiveness of rolling out these micro-credentials or responding to a situation where you might need it. We did see in Ontario, I believe it was the lab technicians, in Ontario, they came up with a course that was only about a week, about 3 days actually in total. And they were able to respond to that, but it seems to be lagging. So what have you seen in your work that could maybe help that, or the governments could do better?
Garrison, it's a really sad situation because, again, coming here as an immigrant, and other people can, I guess, relate to the same, and Nick can weigh in too. It feels like when the government needs it, they can make it happen in days. But when people need it, it takes years to advocate and get things done. For example, like during the COVID situation, and COVID exposed a lot of gaps in the system and, you know, even how our system functions, especially in the healthcare sector, because you're absolutely right. Like when you need lab technicians, you can just say 3 days, you take a course and you can be a lab technician. But when people want to bring their skills here to Canada from other countries, then they need to go through rigorous evaluations, assessments, learnings to be a lab technician. And I know lab technician programs typically took 2 years to be practicing in Canada. And same with the healthcare system, nursing. There was a call put out, you know, during COVID-19 when there was really a high demand and a crunch for frontline workers, like anybody who had experience of healthcare in Canada, they can come and practice. And even if you had slightest of knowledge of healthcare sector, you would be working and serving these COVID-19 patients, right? So that really blows my mind. And, you know, we can be more responsive, we can be proactive rather than being reactive in every situation. And there is a lot more work that needs to go in terms of advocacy for, you know, the sectors that need people, and we have the skills. We can't continuously, you know, try to do a mismatch of filling in the labor shortages in high demand sectors with bringing in people with different skills and then asking them to pivot and adapt and retrain. It's a very sad situation.
Yeah, and you know, Nick, our organization, and I had the privilege of having actually 2 doctors working with me as part of my team. And when, you know, Juan, when you're discussing the heavy regulation, so, you know, yeah, okay, we have that. But Nick, can something be done about that? Like, so, like we have it, so how do we deal with this to kind of make it quicker? Like there's a problem. People can't get a doctor, a family doctor nowadays. So Juan and Nick, what do you think? What can be loosened up to kind of help this problem? Hey, we got some big thinkers in this country. We've got money. We can do this thing. So what's your thoughts on it?
Garrison, I'm an activist at heart.
Yeah.
And so I've turned on and told the federal government, you need to defang the regulatory bodies. Number one, the only way to do that is for the government to create their own recognition bodies, which are funded by the government. What will happen is eventually those self-regulated gatekeepers, I don't call them regulatory bodies, I call them self-regulated gatekeepers, will shrivel. Because then your government is, so who's going to have the right to create the regulation? No one more than the government. If you're working for the government, you're working for the federal government, and the federal government recognizes you, yes, but as an activist, I get into trouble when I say things like that. But that is the big picture thinking, if we're talking about that. But again, when we bring this back to micro-credentials for newcomers, there are a couple of things I want to talk about very quickly. Number one is we have to recognize that the challenges are very different for regulated professions to the unregulated ones. For example, I can tell you one thing. You know which category of people get jobs fastest? Salespeople. People sell themselves to the employer. No problem. Okay. So, but when you're talking about regulated professions, it's a completely different animal. So you're going to have to start looking at the credentials that we're talking about, micro credentials, based on that as well. The second point is, much like I said, immigrants are not one monolith, employers are not either. So you'll find that the challenges actually are, it's the upside down pyramid, because the larger bodies mostly understand theoretically the challenges, and they will go and hire people. But they're also so heavily staffed that it boils down to personal choice. And we do know the systemic challenges that occur in personal choice. And so it's important to understand that as you go down, the biggest challenge is in the middle. What do I mean by the middle? Because the small employer has no choice but to put an accountant in, or else he can't file his taxes. He doesn't have a choice what color you are, what language you speak, what your accent is. He has to hire someone who's available. It's the middle that's always the challenge. Thanks.
Excellent. Juan, any comments on that?
You know, going back to micro-credentials and how it can help, and as Nick says, there is no basically one particular immigrant. You know, we cannot say all of them are the same. Yeah, we have different areas. But you know, the way I will look at micro-credentials is one way or another, they are here to enhance your employability in the marketplace. You know, that's really what it boils down. Yeah? Every industry is different. Every industry will have different regulations. But what we want to make sure is how we can facilitate, or what tools are available for immigrants to integrate into the workplace. Micro-credentials is one of them, and of course it will be different from industry to industry. Yeah? But the whole point of micro-credentials is like short time, very specific, so people can start or can rejoin their careers. This is what it boils down. And again, we're seeing that industry needs professionals, but they still want to see that there is some level of a standardization on the people that they are hiring. And again, some industries have more, some industries have less. But I am just, and why I'm mentioning this is because someone in the chat says there are a lot of online learning tools available to everyone. Yeah, there are. But how can you prove that you have completed them and it's not being someone else who has done it for you? And that's where the regulatory bodies come in. Someone mentioned that in the chat. But again, you know, micro-credentials is just one of the tools that will make easier to get a job or to start your career in Canada. That's that I would like to.
Thank you. Good point. And Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I almost want to circle back to Nick's earlier point about micro-learning versus micro-credential, because I think that is a very interesting idea. You know, I mean, can you imagine if these days, let's say BCIT or BCC, we're developing these new micro courses and programs, and instead of calling them micro-credentials, we just create a new page and we say micro-learning. I think it would know is not going to be as appealing to the prospective students. And so I get it, right? People are looking not only for learning, but they're looking for some kind of recognition, right? So if I invest $1,000, a few $100, whatever, into so many hours of learning, and they're saying that by the end, I should have acquired these competencies. So great, I feel that I've got the competencies, but can you give me something, whether it's a badge or it's called a statement of completion, and I want to be able to put it in my resume, and I call it micro-credential. You know, currently in most resumes, right, we would have a section that is education, and people tend to put their degrees or diplomas, like the formal education, longer ones. And then they would have a section that said skills. And many people would say, I'm competent in Microsoft Office and all that. Maybe in the future, right, as more micro-credentials become available, what the resume or someone's portfolio should include is a section that can still be called skills, or it can actually be called micro-credentials. But no matter, I think the content of that section should be a more sophisticated description of the skills and competencies that I have developed, you know, whether I'm a new immigrant or not so much, instead of just listing the courses that I have done. So I think in that sense, the idea or the practice of micro-credential is actually providing new immigrants with some new ammunition, because a lot of it is about themselves marketing their skills and competencies to employers, right? That piece of paper or a digital badge, being reactive can only do so much. You have to proactively talk about what you can do to the employers.
And you know, Michael, you bring up a really good point. And so one of the things that we need to have in this equation is to hear from employers. If you're building something so that employers look at it as something of value, what are the efforts that should be made to talk to employers and say, would you recognize something developed in this kind of a course versus this kind of a course, micro-learning, whatever it may be. But let's hear from the employers. Let's get their feedback. Sometimes I feel that, you know, that there are important people who are not, they don't have a seat at the table. So when we're creating programs, in isolation, thinking that it's going to solve a problem, but we're not really talking to them. That's just my perspective. I think we should be talking to employers, and we should ask to consult with us so that we can create something that helps them as well as the newcomer.
Yeah, we're missing so much there when we're not consulting with everyone, including the clients, the participants as well. We're going to open the floor pretty soon. I just got one more question directed at Juan, and the panel can jump in. You know, Nick talked about the construction sector and sort of talking about it like they've got a process and they're doing something right. Juan, are you seeing any sector that's kind of doing this right that could be communicated and transferred to most sectors to get the micro-credentialing right, or even another process that they use to train people into the various sectors?
You know, my sector is specific with IT and business, but I can speak on behalf of BCIT when we started to develop the credentials. Actually, you know, this is one of the things that we took the time to go and ask industry, what people need right now? Where is that gap? You know, because that's how we came with all these micro credentials, especially in IT, because that's where is the biggest gap right now. Well, in my industry, you know, with cybersecurity and data analytics. So I think some of the things that we have done correctly or we have done right is that we sat down with industry and we asked, what are the skills that most people are lacking? What's the training that cannot be found anywhere, you know? And again, I go back to cybersecurity and data analytics, because when you look out there, there are cybersecurity credentials that will take you 2 or 3 years, data analytics that will take you 2 or 3 years. But there are people who are working within the industry that they just need the bits and pieces to get there. So, you know, same thing happened with marketing when we saw the impact of social media in marketing. Yeah? So we as industry, okay, what the new marketers or people who are working in the marketing industry they need, and they need more education, more skills on how to handle social media, how to do the data analytics of social media. Yeah? So that's, I think, as Nick mentioned, that's very important to sit down with industry and ask them the questions. Yeah,
Excellent.
that's and the other thing, just to add this, I see being faster the response from industry when we are developing micro credentials than it's being with the government. Okay, because you know, unfortunately, this is what happens, especially with immigration. Yeah, we do a consultation of what skills are needed. By the time the report is done, 3 years have gone by. By the time it goes to Immigration Canada, you know, there is another 2 years. By the time the immigrant gets into the country and gets their PR, it's 7 years. Yeah? So that happened. I can talk about the Olympics in 2010. We need a lot of people in construction. We need a lot of people in construction. Yeah, that was in 2010. And people who apply within that particular bucket of construction, they got here until 2017, when the construction boom for the Olympics was kind of over. We were lucky that there was another bounce in the real estate. But I see the response from private industry being faster than from the government. I just wanted to.
That's an excellent point, and thank you for reminding us about the Olympics, because that seemed to galvanize a lot of projects really quickly. Vandna, we'll get your answer, and then we'll open the floor.
It's not like an answer, but more like a comment, because definitely there has been, in my experience, a huge gap between what we identify as our labor shortage and what we are promoting for people to get immigrated. So if our labor shortage is entry-level positions, you know, warehouse work, construction, why are we promoting medical professionals, engineers, doctors, accountants, psychologists from other countries by giving them hundreds and thousands of points to apply for the immigration category? What is the intent here? Are we expecting that we will bring these? Because to me, immigration system itself seems like a very oppressive system. And also, like, when we have people here with the consultations with the regulatory bodies or the gatekeepers, as Nick named them, with the post-secondary educations, with the government funding available, why cannot we develop a program to see if they have the learnings and assessments done for their prior landing experience? And if there is something that is, you know, regulated by law in Canada and we identify it as a gap, why not just bridge the gap and let them practice their own profession? It's going to be such a relief to all Canadians, because we are struggling with accessing our healthcare system, with construction workers, you know, being there, with journeymen, with now and putting another regulation on the trades professionals that they cannot work if they don't have Red Sea. So we are creating more barriers and we are lifting less barriers. So it's very difficult and it's very painful to see that, because a lot of work has gone into it and we are not seeing the desired results as of yet. So, I mean, there needs to be a broader consultation, and a lot of other folks should be invited at the table: employers, post-secondary educations, governments, definitely regulatory bodies, to how to bridge that gap. And if there is skill shortage in certain sector, do not create English as a barrier for them. Because if we have everything, then English becomes another barrier, right? So how do we, you know, keep fighting this?
Nick?
Sorry, I want to quickly jump in, Garrison, just a quick comment. when the express entry was being designed, I was appointed by the federal government to be chairing a panel on immigrant employment challenges. And in that, I had turned around and said, when you have express entry, if someone hits the profession medical doctor, you should have a video that talks about the challenges that you're going to face in order to practice that profession. It's just wrong. It's ethically wrong to bring someone here so that they can have employment as a cab driver. It's demeaning. We're taking someone away from a country where they're contributing and they're taking care of this, and we're bringing them here and we're telling them, you know what, you gotta drive a cab. That's horrible. It's the worst thing. I've had heated conversations with the regulatory bodies in the medical sector. You can trust me. I'm not shy, as you may have noticed. The problem is they're all saying, oh, well, we're doing the best. That's not okay. Please, your best is not okay. The most important thing that we forget is it's time that immigrants have a seat at the table. Please, don't design programs and systems for us without talking to us. There's no immigrant at the table. Look at the stuff. We've seen the reports about the racism in IRCC. So there are no immigrants wanting to work over there. And that's the people they should be talking to. Sorry, Garrison.
That is so well said. Anyways, it shows all the passion and the work that needs to be done, but the passionate voices that are needed. Okay, folks, we're going to open up the floor, and the way this could work best is if you want to direct your question to a panel member, that's probably the best way, and then others can comment. And we just put your hand up and we'll try and spot you. Tina and I will be looking through the participants to see who is first and so on. Thank you. So let's open the floor. I can't see any hands right now. I've got to change my mode. So any questions for the panel?
No hands yet, Garrison, but there's some very, very great comments in the chat, and we will urge you folks to come forward. I see a hand up. Vandna, yeah, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored that an immigrant is now becoming a participant in this talk. So, yeah, Tina knows me, and yeah, so my point over here, especially because I'm from the healthcare sector, there's no question in this, but just a request, because you people have the power, or you have the path to lead or develop something. So I'm a pediatric dentist from India, have years of study, years of experience. I got my PR so easily because I had everything properly listed. My IELTS score was very high, but then, and even I knew the process, that there's an equivalency process, but I thought it would be easy. But after landing, when the INR is converted to dollars, it doesn't last for a long time. And then when you get into the post-settlement agencies, all the offers for the jobs that are there are the entry workers, the entry level. You go into a warehouse, you go into this. Even if I want to practice as a dental assistant, I have to have a credential, I have to have a certificate, I have to have a registration. So you can imagine crushing the individuals. I should say ego. We all do have ego, even though it's said that all jobs are at par. If you put so much of effort or experience or years into it, coming down here, starting again from nothing, and even that we are ready to do, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money, which I think are the most valuable assets. If I'm going to grow into 40 as soon as possible, like I'm going to go into 40 years of age and I'm still studying, when will I earn and when will I establish myself? It takes a long time. So I have done this part in India, and again I come back here and I do this. Then giving the PR they never thought of, or they never gave me the idea that it's gonna be so tough and I will be offered only the entry-level job because I have to fund myself. I have to pay tuition for the exam, and it's so very difficult. So I need, like, even when giving, like Mr. Nick Narani said that during giving the PR or the validation of the process, there should be something that validates or assesses the skills of an individual in their own profession, or something like for the architects, I said, they have an internship program. So if you've completed 7 years before in your own country, you can have a paid internship. So why not that for doctors? Or even if I'm a dentist and I see there is a shortage of doctors over here, and I want to move into medicine, but it's too difficult. So there should be something that assesses your skills and helps, or there should be a bridge program, or like students in the colleges go into countries overseas and observe. They have the international student program. Something like that should be developed so that the immigrant who is a highly federal skilled worker per se should save time and should save money and ease out into this process and become, like, if I have a number of resources to offer, I find it difficult because the country is not ready to accept my skills. So yeah, and it's so very sad that we have to do entry-level work when we are highly skilled and we get the PR on basis of that. So there should be something for assessment of skills and something like internships or gap programs, say 1 year, 2 years, but they pay you when you are learning, like a stipend, and then you get into your job or into your own profession. Or rather, this stuff of federal skilled workers should be stopped. It's just an irony. Thank you.
Any comments from the panel with that? And then Jesse, you have the next
Yes,
question.
you know, and this is where I said caveat emptor, buyer beware, is not cool. When I launched the Canadian Immigrant magazine, Margaret knows because she knew this person. There was a doctor who every morning would dress up in a suit, and he'd drop his 2 girls off to school, and he'd go to Metrotown Mall and change into a security guard's uniform. That's not cool. You're taking away people's own self-esteem. How is this okay? And when are the voices going to turn into a collective where the government has no choice? That collective is necessary. That tsunami of voices is necessary. Every one of you on the panel is necessary for that talk to happen. There are only 3 things that help immigrants. Let me be very clear. Number 1 is something like microloans, which is the windmill program. It's a great program. The second program, the one that's bigger than that, is the federal government funding that gives immigrants, gives an employer 3 months subsidy, wage subsidies help. Look at what BioTalent is doing. They've got wage subsidies happening, and people are getting jobs because when they go in, they work for 3 months. The employer says, yes, I can recognize. So someone whose job market price would be about $100,000. If that person is sitting at home for 18 months, for a year and a half, how much is the tax loss? So you want to take a choice of 18 months tax loss, or you want to pay a 3 months tax? This is the way I don't understand why the government doesn't get this.
Great point. Jesse, please go ahead.
Thank you. Nick, you touched on it a little bit earlier, talking about some of the success that you've seen recently with people that you work with. And Michael, you had talked about the pendulum kind of swinging favor of newcomers these days. I was curious to know, in your observation right now, how effective micro-credentialing is in terms of helping people get into their industries and actually getting working on a path that goes, or is it more a situation where we really like the idea, it's in process, but it's still not quite connecting in terms of getting people where they want to be?
It's the last one, Jesse, very clearly. So I see a lot of my audience coming in, and they do courses like Coursera, like Hemant pointed out in his comments. Yeah, they do Coursera, but again, our employers don't really look at that as recognition. So if we are building something, if we are telling people to go and get something, we've got to be very clear that we have to have conversations. It cannot be some person in Ottawa who's 70 years plus, who's sitting and taking a decision on what newcomers are going to do and how we're going to do the interweb thing, because that person probably doesn't even know how to use Instagram. So we need to get people together. We need to have employers together. We need to have immigrants' voices. We need to get everyone. We need to have organizations like DIVERSEcity at the table. When you're creating these programs, when you're creating policy, it can't be in isolation. Thanks, Jesse, for the question.
Right. So I'll try to provide maybe a positive spin to Jesse's question. Nick earlier talked about soft skills, right? So we all talk about soft skills, and we can call them whatever. We're really talking about employers looking at this newcomer applicant and thinking, is this someone who actually understands the work culture, right, in my company, and so on and so forth. So this is about acculturation. And I think a lot of employers, when they talk about Canadian experience, they're probably hinging on that, right? Yeah. Now, so because it's so intangible, it has always become quite challenging for newcomers, on the one hand, to acquire what may be considered soft skills, and then on the other hand, to actually convince the employers that I have acquired those skills. I see that a growing number of micro-credentials, I think including at BCIT, Juan, maybe you can talk about the readiness micro-credential that you guys have. There is a growing number of micro-credentials that are about soft skills. They're often called communication of this and that, right? And so this is interesting, because before we have this idea of a micro-credential, these courses actually existed. But they existed either as standalone courses, or they're somehow embedded in a bigger credential program, like a part-time program. And to be honest, I think a lot of new immigrants don't pay attention to these courses, or not even to soft skills, until maybe employment counselors point that out to them, or they go into a workplace and they get into some kind of situation where they notice that, hey, I'm not really understanding, right? Why my teammates are not really collaborating with me well. So maybe this is one area about micro-credentials that can potentially help new immigrants. It's on the one hand, providing more soft skills training that are visible now, being called micro-credentials. And then on the other hand, being able to obtain the training, get the competencies, and put that in their resumes, and be able to explain to the employers, right? This is what I have learned, and let me explain to you. I remember recently when my department was hiring for a position, and one of the candidates talked about her spending time to learn about Indigenous issues in Canada. And she was able to kind of bring us to this attention, right? That even though she's been here for not a long time, she is becoming more aware of what Indigenous matters are all about. And that sticks. And the whole hiring committee was very impressed by her 3 minutes answer to Canadian experience question. So I hope that provides a bit of positiveness to micro-credential, right? So there are technical skills, but they're also soft skills.
Great. And Vandna, I see your hand up, and I know, Jesse, you've got a question, but we do have to wrap. And I just wanted to ask the panel, and please maybe pose your question in the chat or a comment quickly, so we can kind of at least catch that. But I do want to, as a closing question to the panel, what does your new or alternative credential landscape look like for the future?
Okay, I'll go first. I think the term micro-credential is probably going to stick, particularly in post-secondary, despite what Nick may think. But at least in the next 5 years, while there will be a growing number of micro-credentials, I don't think that they would become for example, if you look at continuing studies, I don't think micro-credentials would become the dominant kinds of offerings. I think the certificate, the diploma programs are still going to be at the core, because colleges and institutes, we don't build programs only for newcomers, right? So, you know, the market is much broader than that. But yeah, I think there's a growing number. And I really hope that more of my colleagues in different departments will be looking at some of the soft skills areas in their professions, in their occupations, and may be able to create micro-credentials that can actually help newcomers. But we have to advocate, because not all academic departments would focus on newcomer needs, right?
So question for both Michael and Juan. I asked this question, may have been skipped. Are your micro-credentials available online?
Some of them,
barrier.
Yeah, some of them are online. And you have to remember, when we developed the micro-credential courses, we were in the middle of the pandemic. So we had to deliver them online. So that's that, but we have, for September, we have both online and in person.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Because, yeah, and you know, I just want to make a comment on what Michael said. Yeah, I don't think micro-credentials will ever replace formal education and formal training. You know, the whole point of micro-credentials is just to provide the bits and the specific skills that you are missing to fit for a particular job. You know, that's the role of a micro-credential, you know, provide you the skills, being soft skills or technical skills. They are just filling the blanks, but formal education will never be replaced by micro-credentials. And how micro-credentials can help new immigrants or immigrants as an employment tool is just by, you know, looking at your resume, looking at the job postings and see what I am missing from there. Which micro-credential will help me to fill in those gaps. Yeah, that's the whole role of micro-credentials. Now, and again, not every industry right now is ready for micro-credentials. That's the reality. But this is what we're working on right now, you know, to make sure there is that filling the blanks, and we are the providers who help job seekers to fill in those blanks.
Okay,
to Garrison's question, what do I look like? What does it look like from the future?
Yes.
I see it as more a collaboration between employers, newcomers, and stakeholders like DIVERSEcity, who would bring that knowledge and create programs that are really suited and valid for the time when an employer looks at a resume and says, yes, okay, this person's qualified to get a job.
Good way to close, Nick. And I think we are the voices. We hold some power here to kind of keep pressing this issue, and also the people that have joined us. You do have a voice in your occupations and business. Thank you, the wonderful panel that we have, Juan, Vandna, Nick, and Michael. This has been a real enriched conversation. I've learned a lot, and it's definitely something that has stirred a lot of interest. Special thanks to our marketing team, Margaret and her gang, and Tina. It really takes a village. It definitely takes a village to work with me. And I thank you all for a very insightful conversation. So our next talk will be, what does belonging mean to you? And hopefully around November or December, we'll do that. Maybe something a little surprise earlier than that from DIVERSEtalk. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day, and there's a weekend coming up ahead. Please have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.